Hi there, it's March the 10th and we're continuing our progression through Torah, and we're in the book of Numbers, in Hebrew Bamidbar, in the desert, and we come today to chapter 14 and the first part of chapter 15. Chapter 14 is a terrible chapter, very sobering chapter. In this chapter the people complain because they've had a bad report back from most of the spies who've been in to look at the promised land, and the spies have said it's too much for us, we can't do it. And the people they really complain bitterly, saying in fact we would have died, we wish we could have died in Egypt rather than here out in the desert, rather than at the hands of these enemies who are going to defeat us. Joshua and Caleb, the two spies who have brought a good report, say, don't be ridiculous, God is with us, God has promised this. But the people win the day, and the people push, and they decide that they can't go in. God is really angry with the people about this, and he kind of says, Moses, stand aside, I'm going to destroy this people. And Moses actually intercedes for the people, a very powerful intercession. And he says, God, if you do this, if you destroy these people, then the people who are around in the nations around will say that you were not able to bring your people, you were not able to complete the promise that you had made to them. And actually, Moses speaks back to God the words that he has he's heard from God back in Exodus 34 about the nature of God, that God is gracious, compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in love, forgiving sin, not turning a blind eye to sin, but forgiveness is there in God. And Moses knows this, and he appeals. And so God actually says, okay, I'm forgiving them. I will forgive, but this will happen. They will not, this generation will not enter the promised land. They will go around the land for 1 year for every day that those spies were in the promised land spying it out. They will go round the desert for 40 years. And those children who you said they would be victims for the tribes in that new land, they're going to be the ones who actually inherit. And so the people actually ignore Moses and they say, oh God, forgive us, and they decide that they're going to go into the land anyway, but they're beaten back by the Amalekites and they are defeated, and they know that they can't gain the land without God's power with them. The beginning of chapter 15 is a seemingly very insignificant in one sense chapter, because it lays down some regulations for offerings, but it's interesting that these offerings are to be made when they come into the land. It's as though God is saying, I will have my way, I will have my people in the land, and when they come into the land, this is the way that they are to bring offerings. They're to bring offerings with flour, with olive oil, with wine, with things that are the produce of the land. Because even though they've refused me, and even though they will die in the desert, there will be a day when sacrifices are made to me, including the produce of the land. In fact, there in Numbers 14:20, God says, I'm determined that my glory will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. One of the things that we see in this event, in this terrible episode in the life of Israel, is when the will of the people is against the will of God, it leads to disaster. We, in our day and age, become so reliant, we become so led by the will of the people, by what people want, and ignored what God wants, that actually we're finding that the will of people leads us into dark and difficult places. We must remember that people can only decide things according to God's will. If something is decided and it's not in accordance with God's will, it cannot prosper. Just like the Israelites trying to go into the promised land without God's blessing upon them. We can only go forward as nations and as peoples as we go forward in the presence and in the will of God. Have a good March the 10th.